I'm joined now by Professor Peter Collignon from the Australian National University again. He's an infectious diseases physician. Thanks for joining us again, Peter. You must be very pleased at this first step towards getting elective surgery or other elective medical procedures up and running.
Yeah, I think it's very good news. And again, not only have we flattened our epidemic curve, we've turned it south and we're keeping it at very low numbers. And that's very good news. It means all we've done, particularly what we did in mid to late March, in which I note South Australia has been consistent with applying those without going too far, has shown we're in good stead. We can stop the transmission of this virus to a large degree, so we can keep the numbers very low. And that means we can start resuming a lot of things that were taken off a little while ago because we've got capacity, and elective surgery is just one of those. But it's also things that we can, go out and do. And South Australia, I think, has shown by putting in things that were all agreed by all the premiers and chief ministers in mid to late March. Doing that, they've shown they have just as good results as the states, for instance, of Victoria, that's gone further than that, but really no evidence that they've had better control than South Australia.
And South Australia has had outbreaks. It even had one kid infected with coronavirus in a school, but it's kept its schools open. And surely that's the test case for the rest of the country. It's shown that they've been able to keep their schools open and it hasn't led to any problems.
Well, I think schools is a big issue. I mean, all the evidence in Australia as well as overseas is that children under the age of 15 in particular relatively rarely get this infection. It's not that they don't get it, but if they do get it, they seem to be not transmitters of the infection, unlike influenza where they're big factors.
Yep.
But this is different to influenza. So all the evidence is that, you can keep schools open at a low risk to other students, but even to others. And the problem with not opening schools again is the rate we've got now is very low. And with all this extra testing we're doing, it will make sure that, hey, there's not a whole lot of cases we've missed. But if we don't open schools in this term, winter is likely to be a bigger danger than now because, winter respiratory viruses transmit more. So does that really mean we keep schools closed to October? I mean, I don't actually think that's probably realistic and not in proportion to what we've seen here. And also, even if you look at Germany, they still have 2,000 new cases a day, yet they're looking at opening schools. So I think we do have to look at the data, and we may have to change as time goes on, particularly as what we call antibody tests are available, and we really see what the rate of infection is in children and are they transmitting it. But at the moment, the available data from here and everywhere else says that one of the safest places to be is schools compared to other places that we keep open.
Speaking about data, I've read some interesting studies from overseas, and they've talked about just the prevalence of this virus being perhaps more widespread than was understood. They've talked about the need for random testing, so across a population, rather than just testing those with symptoms to get a good idea of this. And the other measure we've heard a bit of talking about is testing sewerage. Can you explain to us the rationale behind this sort of widespread testing and testing of sewage, when Australia will do that and what it will tell us?
Well, I think Australia is already looking at starting that. You've heard that in South Australia they're thinking about it. I know in New South Wales they're looking at it. I know in Queensland, and I know in my hometown of Canberra we're looking at it as well. And the rationale for that is that about 2/3 of people who've got this virus excrete it from their bowel because it seems to maybe multiply in their bowel wall as well. Now, we don't think in places like Australia that's a big source of spread, but it does persist there for quite a while, even up to 21 days or longer. But what that means, and it was shown in a study in Holland, that they actually showed that it detected in sewage from a city a couple of weeks before they saw a big increase in cases. So first of all, it's the one test, if it works, where we can test truly the whole community rather than just individuals and subparts of the community. I mean, it may be worth, can we test Bondi compared to Penrith, compared to Canberra? So that allows us to look at the restrictions we've got in place. And if we see a lot of spread, we've got to up the restrictions compared to if we've got low levels of restriction. And it gives us potentially an early warning sign of, hey, we've got a problem and we need to actually maybe cancel elective surgery, for instance. But it's a very good indicator. The other things we need to do is more testing on people, first of all, with respiratory symptoms, and to see what percentage of those in Australia may be due to this that we're missing. The trouble with just taking people at random and testing them is the test we use for that, the PCR test, only detects the virus if it's there. So even if you're negative today, doesn't mean you're not going to have it in 5 days' time or a week's time. The other test that we need to roll out once we get more of them and they're better is actually the ones we call antibody tests, where we see if somebody has had this infection. Now, that's only a good test 2 weeks after the event, but it tells us how far it's spread. And that's what in the US and others they're starting to show. Now, in Australia, I think we're going to see much less undetected spread than in the US, where, in fact, they missed a lot of the virus and it's been spreading there for a couple of months at least. But it tells us how much spread there's been. But when we look at that, even in the US in high areas, it's still only 4 or 5% of the population. That's not enough to give us immunity as a population. Herd immunity means 50 or 60%. So my taking of that is, yes, this spreads a lot more. Yes, the mortality is probably lower than what we think, but it's still a big problem that we've got to keep on controlling and stop cases reappearing, test, quarantine, et cetera, and make sure we keep it under control.
Fascinating stuff. Thanks for joining us again, Peter.
Thanks for having me.